Hey, show, don't tell. Said is dead.
Write the last page
Don't compare
first.
yourself to other
Don't
people.
edit what
Writing
you write.
is
Your
rewriting.
darling common tropes.
Writing is
Don't edit
rewriting.
what you write.
Hello, it is me. Today we are going to be ranking some writing advice because I feel like there is a lot of it and I get overwhelmed. Writing is one of those things where there's not hard and fast rules. And given that we don't all get replaced by AI bots, at one point or another, you turn somewhere for writing advice. Now before I can see you commenting and I want you to stop for 1 second and listen. Who am I to be telling you? I am an aspiring author. I hate that word because I am an author because I've written books, but I am not published anywhere yet. I'm currently querying a novel, writing another one, have another one shelved. So I've written about 3 books, but I feel like I have a good grasp of the general writing advice and what's been helpful for me. So I'm essentially just giving you a bunch of writing advice that I didn't come up with and organizing it. So deal with it, okay? I've created a tier ranking list. Some of this is gonna be really specific and I want you to know that I understand that. My tiers, I'm going to explain them. They're pretty niche, but the top tier is pretty easy. Please do this. This is advice I have found super helpful. I unironically use it all of the time. Next up, we have Lynette Noni. She is the author of the Prison Healer trilogy, and things in this tier are like underrated pieces of writing advice that really work well for me. You might not have heard before, or you might not have taken seriously before. Also, everybody go read yourself the Prison Healer trilogy. The third one is recommending ACOTAR. So listen, I'm wearing a sweatshirt with Rhysand. I like ACOTAR. I think it's a good series. You can have your own opinion about it, that's fine. If you ask for a fantasy recommendation, it's very likely that you've heard ACOTAR. And it's not that those are bad books at all, but you've just heard it so many times that it kind of loses meaning, right? One piece of writer's advice that goes in that category is show, don't tell. It's like you've heard that from everybody and their mother. The next tier is maybe if you're Colleen Hoover. So if you don't know, Colleen Hoover has like so many books on the bestseller list, it's like ridiculous. She's very successful, incredibly successful author. So this is advice that works if you're like full-time and you're not doing anything else and you're just writing and you can do whatever you want writing-wise because you have no constraints, you have no other job. That doesn't mean that the advice is bad, but it doesn't really work realistically for most people because they don't have this, like you can't get away with it unless you're like Colleen Hoover. And then the last one is The Darkling, and I'm not gonna elaborate. There are some people who love The Darkling, quite a lot of people. And I'm not talking about the show Darkling, I'm talking about the book Darkling who tries to skin people. We don't support that. Starting off, we have write for yourself. Aw, that's so nice. I'm gonna put this in recommending ACOTAR. Like, that's something that I hear all the time, and I don't find it to be super helpful when it's like, I'm struggling to write and somebody tells me this. It's like, okay, cool. Next up, we have reading your work out loud. I'm gonna put this in Lynette Noni. I think it's kind of an underrated piece of advice. One of my last stages of revision is having Microsoft Word read out everything. Like, see your words and your writing in a new format. Find that to be helpful. Neglect everything else when you're writing. I'm gonna put this is a prime example of maybe if you're Colleen Hoover. This is no shade on Colleen Hoover. I unironically read a lot of Colleen Hoover. Not a weird amount, just a normal amount. If you have it available to you to neglect everything else and really focus in on writing, that's really great, but it's not required. And I think it's kind of dangerous to give this advice really freely because it makes it seem like, well, if you have this other job that you're thinking about, or maybe like you're writing while your kids are right next to you playing, or like that you're not gonna be able to write because you have to focus solely on writing and neglect everything else in your life. And I just don't think that that's true. I think you can write while being distracted. Writing the last page first. This is some of the advice that I found on this Forbes article that I Googled when I was like 14 about what you should do first when writing a book is write the last page first. And I'm gonna put this in Lynette Noni because I think I have not heard that advice since reading that article. And I think it's a really good think I always do this now when I'm going into, especially like a longer project, 100% of the time, I mean, it's only been 3 books, but 100% of the time for me, it does not end up being the same last page when I get there. It gives you somewhere to go. And that's so important when starting a book. Like, you don't have to know how you get to that last scene. Maybe if you have a really good idea for a cliffhanger, or you know what couples you want to be together, or you have this image of what the last scene is gonna look like right before the credits roll on your book, right before the acknowledgements, right? I find that to be so helpful and so much less intimidating. I don't know what it is. Next up, read a lot. Okay. I don't know how common this is in the mainstream world. I'm gonna put this in Lynette Noni again, I think, because I used to not have time to read really, but reading in my genre and understanding like what's being published right now, what is the writing styles that's working for people, what's the writing style that works for me, what are tropes that I like, what are character archetypes that I like, can be so inspiring. But I think this advice doesn't work for everybody, because sometimes if you read a lot of like a certain author or a certain like type of book, then it can start to bleed into your own writing in a way that feels more copy-ish instead of inspiration. Also, if you read a lot, maybe you won't have enough time to actually write any meaningful words because you'll just be reading all the time. Ooh, what's this one? This one seems spicy. You can't edit a blank page. Recommending ACOTAR. Easy money. But I've heard it so many times, and at the end of the day, it's like, okay, sounds good. I guess I'll just write a sentence then if I can't. But I also think that can be kind of dangerous because it can lead people to writing just like a bunch of garbage to sort through. There does come a point where you have to be really careful about the words that you're putting down, because this is the final draft now. Like, now it has to be good. Ignore the haters. Well, you know, I have to put this in the please do this category, because even though it's really corny, you still should do it. Please ignore the haters. There's always gonna be them. There's always gonna be a hater, and I don't know why. I think they maybe need to get a new hobby. Except like if there's valid criticism, that's something that you can take into your next project. But like, I wouldn't consider people giving you criticism to be haters. Write how you talk. I'm gonna put this in maybe if you're Colleen Hoover. When I write how I talk, it's a very specific voice, and it works for one book, but then if you use that for every book or every story, it starts to sound like it's the same character, right? If you're Colleen Hoover, if you're Sarah J, if you are a very famous author and people are going to read whatever you write and people love the character voice, you can get away with writing how you talk. Only write when you're inspired. Again, maybe if you're Colleen Hoover, you have the resources to only write when you're inspired, but it's like sometimes I get inspired in the middle of a workday and no another time during the day. To assume that you're always going to be inspired and that you're going to be inspired often enough to be able to get somewhere in your book, or that you will always be available when you're inspired to write, only write by hand. I don't know who this advice is from. I think Neil Gaiman said this or something. He writes his first drafts by hand. I'm gonna say the Darkling only because my hands hurt, and I know a lot of writers who get like arthritis really early on, and my handwriting is bad. Really, I just don't like writing by hand, so that's a total personal preference thing. But some people are Darklina stans, so nothing is original. I don't know if this is like advice or just something to keep in mind. I'm gonna put this in please do this. Like, please remember this, because I think a lot of people get caught up in my idea is not original, somebody else has done this. And it's not about creating something that no one has ever seen before. It's about creating a good story. Like, people want to read about what they know. People want to read about experiences that they relate to, and that, like, when you're reading and you see the enemies and you're like, ooh, I want them to become lovers. And I think remembering that nothing is original can be really helpful to just like get words on the page, right? Writer's block isn't real. Hot take. I think I'm gonna put this in Lynette Noni. I've heard it more recently now, but it kind of goes in line with the only write when you're inspired, but it's kind of the flip side of it. Like, you can definitely be creatively blocked, but that there's nothing stopping you from writing. Try to limit the amount of POVs in your book. This is more specifically like querying advice that I've seen, that like a marketable book oftentimes has less POVs because it's less confusing. I feel like I want to put this in the darkling because I think each story is super different, and I think querying advice oftentimes gets really specific, and I understand that it might be a turnoff for a lot of agents, but at the end of the day, if it's what's best for your book to have a lot of POVs, it's what's best for your book. You just have to think about, does each POV actually matter? If it feels like your story is really disjointed and you have a lot of POVs, maybe look at it that way. Like maybe that's something you can fix. So next up, find the joy in writing. I'll just put it in, you know what? No, it's going in recommending ACOTAR because, okay, if I'm looking for advice, it means I don't have the joy right now. And so unless you can tell me a tangible way to find the joy in writing, like I don't need you to tell me to be happy. I need you to tell me how to get happy with the writing that I have. Create a ritual. I'm gonna put this in, please, Lynette Noni. It's gonna go in Lynette Noni because I don't think it's required. Like, create a space that works really well and a ritual to enhance your writing. So like have a certain candle, have a certain beverage. All these things can help you to create a really good environment. And I have found that to be super helpful in focusing, but I can also write in a coffee shop or on the road or at my lunch hour when people are talking around me, right? I don't think it's necessary to have a routine. I was even considering putting it in maybe if you're Colleen Hoover, because not everybody has like the time or the space in your living area to create a ritual, but because writing sucks sometimes. It's like so hard and for no reason. It's like at the same one time you want to do it because you love it. And then also it's like, this is the worst possible thing I could be doing. Why am I doing this? So I think creating a ritual is a way to romanticize it, which I love. Okay, next up, said is dead. This is going right to the darkling, and I have no qualms about it. Use said, please. Do not distract me. It should be about clarity, like whatever conveys your dialogue the best way, whether that's a dialogue tag, whether that's a sentence that goes before the dialogue or afterwards. Each choice that you make with how you just like categorize your dialogue with a tag or without, what's at the heart of said is dead is think about how you're presenting your dialogue and how it will read visually to the reader, right? So don't listen to said is dead. You can use said. My personal least favorite writing advice ever is write every day no matter what. I do not like this advice very much. And I'm gonna put it in maybe if you're Colleen Hoover. It's just not realistic. And for people to say you have to write every day, you have to touch your project every day, it limits the amount of people who can write and feels confident as writers. Like you can write once a week and be a writer. I think it can be really helpful to get into a state of flow where you are writing every day and you are thinking about your project every day, but you don't have to be a writer. So stop thinking that. Stop it. Okay. Ooh, this one is like don't use a long word when a short one will do. I feel like I heard this in middle school or something. And I am gonna say the darkling. And this is all about like active tense and trimming the fat off of your sentences and making it as concise as possible. Thinking about efficient storytelling, it's more about what message are you trying to get across to the reader, what emotion are you trying to get across to the reader, and what kind of a sentence is going to aid in that. So like a shorter, tighter, more dramatic sentences are going to work really well in thriller, dramatic moments and confrontations and things where things are moving really fast. But when you're describing a beautiful landscape, or when you're talking about the eye contact between the lovers who've been yearning for 300 pages, use the long words, okay? Just think about how different types of sentences work in different situations. I don't think that this type of sentence level advice on a really generic level is helpful. Oh, my next personal favorite is no one cares. I don't know where to put this. It's funny. I'm gonna put this in please do this. No one cares doesn't mean that no one cares about you or that no one cares about your story, but it does kind of mean that. It means that nobody is waiting for you. Maybe you have a friend who's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to read your book. But at the end of the day, like the book or the story that you are writing, you're the only one who can carry it into existence. Nobody cares. On the one hand, there's this release of pressure. Like you're doing it for yourself, but also in certain situations, it can add motivation. I just remember in college, I was writing my first book and I didn't really have any friends who were like, they all supported me and were like, oh my gosh, this is awesome that you're writing a book. But no one was like, hey, have you written 1,000 words today? Nobody cares if you do the work, so you have to build discipline yourself. How I would rather this advice be said is you have to care more than anybody else to get it to exist, right? I'm really like turning into a writing coach when I don't intend to do that. Next up, NaNoWriMo is toxic. I've heard this before, that it's like toxic to make people write every day. And I am gonna put this, you know what? I am gonna put it in the dark lane. I can understand where telling people that they have to write every day, a certain amount of words, a certain, like, that this number will make you happy. I understand where there can be toxicity in that, but I think NaNoWriMo as a organization and as a community is so helpful for a lot of writers. I just remember Nano being this first place where I was like doing writing sprints with people. But if you're trying to do a rewrite, I can see where Nano could feed into a toxicity that you already have a tendency towards. So if you have a tendency for burning yourself out, then Nano could aid in that toxic behavior, but I don't think Nano itself is toxic. Show don't tell, easy ACOTAR. This advice, I get it. I often read books and I'm like, you're telling too much, you should show. But it's so over-recommended that it is so unhelpful. I'm not even gonna describe it to you. Kill your darlings. Recommending ACOTAR again. I understand the advice that you need to not be so tied and connected to your work, but also if you really like a sentence or a paragraph or a character, that's probably because it's good. So I think that Kill Your Darlings can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And I think for people who overwrite, it's really helpful. Or for people who struggle to take criticism about their work, it can be really helpful. But also if you like a character, you don't have to kill them. If you like a plot or a sentence or a narrative arc that you have created, you don't have to get rid of it. Don't be afraid of new ideas that might eclipse the idea that you already love, right? So I think it's helpful, but it's over-recommended. Ooh, next one is stop writing before you run out of steam. There's a lot of ways I could go with this one, frankly. Because I personally tried to do this, but also, if I only have 3 days to write that week and I'm on a roll, I'm gonna keep writing until I run out of steam, frankly. I've also heard this piece of advice a lot, so I'm gonna put it in recommending ACOTAR. Run out of steam, that's okay. I'm giving you permission to run out of steam and find ways to reinvigorate that, because you're gonna run out of steam regardless at some point in the project. So figuring out your own way to manage that is how I would manage that. But yeah, don't write until you're exhausted and burnt out. But you can also keep writing when you have energy. I don't want people to think that if you're writing and you get in flow that you should stop. The Pomodoro method, please do this. This works so well for me. That's a 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. You can get so much done in 25 minutes. It's insane. And learning that and knowing that makes just viewing my day so much more manageable. Or if I have an hour, I'm like, no, that's 2 25-minute spurts. I could get 1,000 words written, right? The Save the Cat beat sheet. I just kind of decided that this was a piece of advice. Lynette Noni, not because it's so underrated. I think a lot of people know about Save the Cat, but it's something that really helped me, and I didn't hear about it for a while. And once I did, it really, really helped me to have that structure. Okay, I really like this advice. It is that reading and thinking count as writing, and yes, they absolutely do. I mean, not all the time, not just thinking about anything or reading anything. Okay. I'm gonna put this in, please do this. Thinking about your story in the shower and reading a book that is in the same vein as your book that gives you inspiration, reading authors that help you refresh your mind. like all of these things I think we should count as writing. At the end of the day, what is writing except for taking things that you see and experience and feel and love and putting that, spitting it back out into the world, right? Don't write linear. Did I even spell that right? Don't write linearly. I had someone comment on my AI video about like there was a typo, which I have so many typos, it's ridiculous. But they were like, who wrote the typo? Was it you or was it AI? And I was like, okay, rude. Grammar, not it for me. So anyway, that's not what we're talking about. Don't write linearly. I'm gonna put this in Lynette Noni because I think it's a piece of advice people don't really think about that often. Like, you don't have to write the book in order, and sometimes it can really help to boost your creativity to skip to the good parts, fill in the gaps later. So next up, prologues are done. This is also kind of a piece of querying advice that I've heard, and I'm gonna put this in the Darkling because I don't like that idea. Yeah, I think a lot of advice like this is just good like check items. Because at the end of the day, you probably know if your book isn't working. Either you're not getting any responses, you're not getting any sales, you're not getting good feedback from people. People aren't able to finish your book. Maybe they say, oh, this is great, but they haven't. Like, they're not able to push through the end. You read it and you're like, usually there are signs when your book isn't working. And I think advice like this, like cut your prologues or don't use purple prose or kill your darlings, like all of these things are just like potential things that it could be to help you identify what the problem is. I think you can have a prologue. So I'm gonna put that with the Darkling. Go be a tree. Spoiler, sorry. Oh, I like this one. Making a playlist or a mood board. Please do this. I used to do this with tests, is I would have a perfume that I would wear when studying, and then I wore the perfume on the test day. Didn't actually do that great on the test, but I would do this really regularly. It helps with memorization. It helps with like put you in the right headspace. And it also just like feels cool. Like I'm like, ooh, I'm so writerly. You know, it's like important to have those things that make you feel like you're a professional because this industry is so hard to get into. It is so hard to practice. It is so isolating. Make that playlist. It is writing, okay? Don't let anybody tell you that it's not. Okay, but don't compare yourself to others. We're gonna be a hot take with this one. I'm gonna say if you're Colleen Hoover, you don't have to compare yourself to other people because your sales speak for themselves, frankly. Like, I think it's good to compare yourself to other people. Not in a way that's like, oh, they're so much better than me, or oh, they're so much worse than me. I think the comparison that can be helpful is reading like, oh, their dialogue is a lot stronger than mine. They have a really interesting way of weaving together scenes. I wish I could do a timeline like that, or I think my prose is a little bit stronger. Like, can be really helpful for you to identify what's not working and what is working. So I think do compare yourself. Oh, I like this one. Write drunk, edit sober. I don't love this one because it implies like you should just be trashed your whole first draft, and I don't love the idea of that. I think I'm gonna put it in recommending ACOTAR just because I've heard it so many times. And I think it can be misleading. Like, I think there are certain situations where it works really well to write drunk and edit sober, specifically really heavy emotional scenes. If you're writing a really complicated like mystery scene or one that requires a lot of like thinking and plot and timing and all this stuff, maybe stick to water. It's funny, the first drink I ever had was while writing a scene because I needed to taste what beer tasted like. I didn't know. And my characters were drinking it, and I was like, probably should have this so that I know. That's the first time I ever drank. Avoid common tropes. Darkling. Put all the common tropes in that you want. Don't let your whole book just be a copy of somebody else's, but like put in the tropes. People love the tropes. Do you know the amount of books that people have bought? You see one of those TikToks that's like, actually it's kind of ridiculous, but it's like, when you crawl bleeding to your enemy's front door and they open the door and they say, and then it like switches to a new one, it says, who did this to you? You go to the comment section of that TikTok, there's at least 10 that are like, oh my gosh, I just bought it. Like, people love tropes. The who did this to you trope, enemies to lovers, like there's only one bed in that inn. Yes, there's only one bed in that inn. Give me a nightmare comfort scene. Like, these are scenes that people want. You don't have to put them in, but do it. I want to read it, okay? Don't edit while you write. We're getting down there, everybody. Don't edit while you write. I'm gonna say recommending ACOTAR. There are people, I know Diana Gebel, don't know her last name, but the Outlander, she wrote Outlander, which, Jamie Fraser. She only writes one draft. This is what I've heard. This might be incorrect. Go do some Googling yourself. Let me know in the comments, but be nice about it. Thank you. There's this like preconceived notion that you write a first draft and then you wait and then you revise and then you go back and then you give it to beta readers. That just because that works for a lot of people doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to serve you or your story the best way. But I don't think there's any harm in like fixing a typo. If it makes you feel better about what you've written to fix the grammar mistake, do it. But don't, I think the heart of this advice is don't let yourself get caught up in parts of the process that aren't important at that time. The final piece of writing advice that I have is writing is rewriting. I'm so tempted to put this into ACOTAR because it's so common. Like, I think this is probably, like, this one and Show Don't Tell are just like the most common. I think I'm gonna put it in recommending ACOTAR because I think it's good, solid advice. But I think what's at the heart of this, and what's really at the heart of this whole experimental moment of a video, is that there are different pieces of advice that are going to work for different parts of your process and different parts of your brain and different parts of people and different parts of the world. If you take anything from this video, is that there's a lot of advice out there. It can help you to identify like gaps in the story. And so hopefully you can take a piece of advice from what I've talked about, or not. You can just sulk in the comment section. That's fine too. I really just hang out there. It's a nice time. Hit that subscribe button, drop me a like, show me a little comment. I'll see you in the next one.